SD Shade 45, we are back. It is the All Out Show with Rude, Jude, and Lord Sear.
Yeah, and we have a very special guest. We have author Sarah Varney on. Scott, can you pick her up, please? Hey, Sarah.
Hi, I'm here.
Oh, wow.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. So we had you on because we've been consciously trying to get in better shape. And your book kind of hit close to home. It's talking about how obesity is fucking with people's dick game.
Well, there's a lot of science behind how obesity particularly affects men and the physiology and sexual functioning of men. And the main one of the central things is that particularly for men who have a lot of what's called adipose tissue, so that's a lot of belly fat, there's a enzyme in that particular type of belly fat called aromatase, and it takes testosterone and it turns it into estrogen. So that's one of the reasons why men who are overweight or obese often have very low levels of testosterone, which I'm sure, as you know, is a really critical part of sexual functioning.
So if you have a big belly, you're creating more estrogen, and that's what women get, right? That's the main.
Right. Well, everybody, both men and women have testosterone and estrogen, but in different, in different proportions. But it's certainly true that men who have bigger bellies tend to have lower testosterone, and that's in part because the testosterone that their body is producing is being turned into estrogen.
What happens when it's turned into estrogen? Then what happens?
Well, you have less testosterone. I mean, the more important thing is that you have less testosterone. And so that inhibits the entire sexual functioning process. So everything from, I'm sure you've heard about men with low T and how they become less interested in sex, but it also makes the kind of sexual process itself that much more difficult.
Word. Yeah. Like you might want to start playing video games instead of chasing chicks because you got extra belly fat.
Right. I mean, one way to think of it is that, obviously testosterone in men decreases, testosterone production decreases as you get older naturally. If you have the way one urologist described it to me was that if you have, an 80-year-old man and a 25-year-old man standing next to an attractive woman, the 80-year-old man might be thinking about, it's a beautiful sky or look at the trees today. Whereas the young man is very attuned to the fact that he's standing next to this woman. So it does everything literally from, just how attentive you are and how kind of tuned in you are to your sexual response to actually the entire, sexual act itself.
There's a quote that I read. It said, for every 50 pounds overweight you lose an inch of penis.
Right. So this also comes from urologists. This is something that's very well understood by urologists. And the thing that I found really interesting in reporting this book, the book obviously looks at everything from how obesity is affecting teenagers and how it affects their dating. And it looks at men and women in their 20s and 30s and what it's like to be out dating, being overweight or obese. And then also looks at marriages. But there is this one chapter that specifically focuses on the effect of weight and sexual functioning specifically. And what I found really interesting there was that when you talk to urologists, they will say, this is no news to us that obesity is having a pretty significant impact on sexual functioning, particularly in men. And it's the way it was described to me is that the penis is affixed to the back of the abdominal wall. So as the belly gets bigger, the placing of the penis against the abdominal wall doesn't change. So, men, as they get bigger, have this, it looks to them as if their penis is shrinking, when in fact it's not. It's just being, in a sense, almost sort of swallowed by their stomach. And there is, in fact, something called the buried penis syndrome. This is not just a freakish thing. This happens with some regularity, and particularly more so now that there's increased obesity, particularly really extreme obesity. And you even have plastic surgeons who are having to go in and, put penile implants in men who are very, very large because their penis, in a sense, has sort of shrunk inside. It looks as if it's shrunk inside their bodies.
That's crazy. So it's almost like a chubby little clitoris.
If you want to describe it that way, yeah, you could, I suppose.
All right, let's talk about with we spent all this time on men. What type of effect is being overweight? And how big is overweight are you talking here? Like, are you talking 20 pounds overweight, 30 pounds, 50 pounds for women?
So this certainly exists on a scale. So some of the sexual functioning issues that the people who are obese or extremely obese, meaning that they have a BMI of, say, over 35, face is certainly very different than people who are slightly overweight. So all of these things certainly exist along a spectrum, and they also, of course, exist within your sort of own cultural cultural mix, right? So we know, for instance, that African American women even if they are obese, they are much more likely to think of themselves as, quote, normal weight, even though they may be obese. Whereas white women are much more likely, normal weight white women are much more likely to think of themselves as overweight, even though they are normal weight. So there's certainly some level of self-awareness and kind of cultural identity that comes into play. That said, there are a lot of large-scale population-wide studies that really look at what are these effects over a population of people. With women, the effects are not as physiological as they are with men. They tend to be much more psychological. Although when you talk to gynecologists and obstetricians around the country, they certainly will tell you that treating obese patients or even heavy patients is a big part of their practice, and that many women will come to them with concerns that certainly are psychological in nature, and maybe they need to see a therapist or go into some type of counseling, but there's also real physical things that happen for these women as well. For instance, there can be an increased, there's increased yeast infections, for instance, that can happen with a lot of women. Because they eat a lot of bread?
Because they eat a lot of bread?
No, it has much more to do with sort of like the pH balance of their sexual organs and just their sort of ability, that's, I guess, the main thing.
Okay. And mentally, what's going on with these women what are the findings?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's, of course, being vulnerable with somebody, both emotionally and physically, requires a pretty high level of trust. And that requires that you have some level of self-appreciation, self-awareness. And so I think for what I found, certainly, and certainly the studies show this, is that obviously women bear a very big burden when they're overweight, and they feel somehow like their weight is affecting their worthiness, which of course it shouldn't, but nonetheless it seems to be. But they're also
it's less about the actual physical. It's less about like the physical shit going on with a woman. It's more about like they feel ugly and so they act weird in the sack. Is that it?
Well, I would say that's specifically about sexual functioning in terms of, but there are definitely other ways in which the physical problems associated with obesity affect human relationships and sexual functioning. So, for instance, some of the women in the book that I talk about and that I spent a lot of time interviewing just talk about how, they come home at night, they're 100 pounds overweight, their knees are killing them. They're exhausted. Now, we all come home from work at night exhausted, and we have to put the kids to get the dinner on the table and put the kids to bed. And, and sometimes for many of us, the last thing on our mind is to try and be intimate with our partner. But for these women, but also for many, many men, there are a whole host of other physical problems that are arising from their obesity. This is not everybody. Of course, there are heavy people who will manage to stay active and whatnot. But when you look at the research and you look at kind of a population-wide study, these population-wide studies, what you see is that it's a big burden to carry around. Your knees really hurt. You might have diabetes. You have a much higher rate of having sleep apnea, so you're not sleeping throughout the night. So there's a lot of problems that occur for you as an individual, and then you bring those into your home with your partner, your house, your spouse, and those can cause all sorts of problems for people in their intimate relationships.
Well, why don't we play? Can you take some phone calls?
Oh, okay.
Sure.
All right, 888-742-3345, 888-742-3345. We're talking about just how being overweight is affecting your sex life. We got Sarah Varney. She wrote How the Obesity Crisis is Complicating America's Love Life. Sarah, thanks for holding tight, and we're going to take some phone calls with you. Ready?
Excellent.
All right, let's go to the phone line. Scott, who we got first, bud? Take the chick.
Yeah, let's, I think.
We have Jamie.
Okay.
From Ohio.
All right, let's talk to Jamie.
Hey, Jamie.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Jamie, what's
How
up?
you doing?
You got Sarah right here.
Yeah, I just want to know if being overweight will have anything to do with how wet you get. If it's a psychological thing, or if it can make it where you're not getting as wet as you used to.
Well, I'm not a gynecologist, and so I would absolutely say that you probably would want to talk to a gynecologist to answer that question. I mean, I can tell you that, I did talk to several gynecologists for the book, and they did say that, many of their patients or overweight patients come to them complaining not just about, female patients obviously, not just about sort of the psychological problems, but that just really there are a lot of physical impairments for them. This, of course, is not for everybody. I mean, there are many overweight and obese women who manage to have a very fulfilling sexual life. So I can't tell you that there's anything physiological in terms of obesity that would affect something like that. I just don't know. So I would encourage you to go and talk to your gynecologist about it.
Are you not getting that wet? Are you not getting that wet?
Not like I used to.
Do you feel like you're just uncomfortable, or do you feel like you feel less sexy, so therefore you get less wet, or is this just some other shit?
I don't know. I thought I was comfortable, but maybe I'm not as comfortable as I used to be when I was smaller.
You on birth control? Because that shit'll dry out your vagina as well.
Yeah.
Just throwing out ideas here.
Not on birth control.
I'm just spitballing here. Sarah, what about the whole argument, if everybody's fat, then nobody's fat? Does that, you know what I mean? Like that whole, if everyone's fat, then suddenly the average is fat, so nobody's fucking fat.
Right. Yeah, well, so the book actually opens up in Mississippi, which is a state that was, of course, ahead of the rest of the country in terms of obesity. And now you have a state where, of course, the majority of people are overweight or obese. And what I found was that, everything, at least in this case, I'm thinking specifically about sort of teenagers and kind of teen dating. What I found there was interesting is that everything just kind of shifted up. So the kids who were obese, who might have been, bullied before or left out of the social networks before, are now the kids that are morbidly obese. So the sort of structure stayed in place. It just all shifted upward.
Okay.
So it's not just as if you have, now that obesity is so widespread, there's just a lot of acceptance of it, and people who are obese don't feel any kind of discrimination. In fact, the other thing that's really interesting, in the dating chapter, I talk specifically about how what I found so fascinating, because I would have assumed the same thing, right? That like as more people became overweight and obese, that we would be less critical of that, right? But what you find in the dating literature, when there's researchers who have gone and looked at millions and millions of matches that have happened on Match.com and lots of other sites, and what they find is that slenderness. Now, I'm not talking about people who are thin. I'm just talking about slender, somewhat normal weight, right? We'll quote normal weight. That is still considered a very prized characteristic, and that people who are overweight, even though they're now the majority of people there, are still less attractive in terms of just dating. This is a simple calculation, right? Who do I click and say, yes, I want to meet them? That being overweight is still very much a hindrance when it comes to dating, regardless of the fact that now so many more people are overweight.
There's a bunch of people that disagree with you, that I think that are big, find themselves big themselves. And here, let's talk to one of them. Scott, go ahead. Get one of them. And who we got, Scott?
All right, we got Marco from New Mexico.
Hey,
Marco, you're on.
I just want to say that's bullshit, because I tell you what, me and my old lady are on the bigger size, and I tell you what, we find different ways, baby, to make it better. And and you know what, we slipping and sliding, getting wet and everything. That's bullshit.
How fat are you?
Hey, I tell you what, man, I weigh 300 pounds, and I'm 5'11".
Okay, you're pretty big. How big's your girl?
Well, I might get in trouble for saying, but I ain't gonna say nothing.
Yeah.
But,
all right.
We match up.
Okay.
But I tell you what, man, is that lady skinny? Ask her if she's skinny.
Yeah,
Are you
so
skinny, Sarah?
I'm not a big person,
Shut
but
Oh, well, see, that's why you made this book so you can make money for us big people.
yeah.
Because I tell you
Well, I'm
what,
sorry
I
you
fuck
think
all
that.
the time.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you think that. I mean, what I really tried to do, quite frankly, was to look at the social science and the medical research. I mean, I had no agenda whatsoever.
Oh yeah,
we
we even get a workout. We even make it 20 minutes, no less, so we can work out.
Woo-wee.
So you sleep with your wife for 20 minutes, and then
I didn't say sleep with her, dude. I'm not Lord Sear. I'm talking about boning down, getting busy. Lord Sear is the only one I know that don't give a damn about getting in it.
All right.
That's the bullshit. It's just
Yeah, don't say it's bullshit. Don't say it's
How
bullshit.
often are you? How often are you? Do you feel like? Let me ask you this, and be fair. Do you feel like if you were, let's say, you were 100 pounds lighter, do you feel like you would have more energy to do it even more than you already do?
No. I tell you what, man. I wake
Come
up
on.
at 6 in the morning. I'm a tired man. I bone before I go to work. I try to bone when I come home, and before I go to sleep, I got energy to spare.
All right, so Sarah, it sounds like he's doing a ton of boning here. Is that is he? Is he average or is he above
I think
average?
he's reading a lot of comic books in this town because I think he's lying.
All right, thanks, bud.
Yeah, I mean, all I can tell you is, of course, there are, and I say this in the book, that of course there are overweight and obese couples that have very active sex lives, and that's wonderful. But what I really tried to do is to say, and this is, I think, always very difficult for people with kind of what are called population studies, right? So there's always somebody who can smoke and not die of cancer. But we know from looking at the research that when you smoke...
Well, see, but you're always going to look for
Why
the
is he
fat
still on hold?
Yeah.
Put him on fucking hold. We
Yeah,
got done with him.
Sorry.
Who else we got, Scott?
We got Big Ron.
You got Big Ron?
Is it the same deal? Is it the same thing,
No,
or
he
is
has a
it
question
something new?
about what is overweight.
All right, here, let's get Big Ron on.
Sure.
Big Ron, go ahead. You have Sarah.
Yeah.
You can speak with her.
My question to the lady is, what defines obesity? Because a person can mentally or psychologically think they're overweight, but not be overweight. So are we talking like grotesquely big people, or are we talking about the chick that, or the person that's in the gym working out that looks big, but in reality they have more muscle than body fat?
Right. So that's a great question. So overweight is defined as a BMI, a body mass index of over 25, and then obese is defined as a BMX index of 30. So in in all of these studies, whether it's a study looking at, weight loss after bariatric surgery, for instance, and its effect on sexual functioning, or to the previous caller, the effect of obesity on sexual functioning, these are wide-scale studies that are done where the person's weight is generally taken and their BMI is calculated by the researchers. There are some studies where it's all self-reported, where they report their weight and they report their height, and then the researchers can calculate the BMI. But there's a lot of care taken in trying to make sure that there's an even yardstick with these studies.
Right.
So it's certainly not just sort of what I think or
put
what
them on
researchers
hold.
think. It's the measurement, yeah.
Okay,
Right.
put him on hold. All right, okay, thank you. Sarah Varney, it was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for fielding these calls and discussing how the obesity crisis is complicating Americans' love life. The book is called XL, How the Obesity Crisis is Complicating America's Love Life. Thank you so much,
very
Sarah.
much. Thank you.
All right, you take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
We'll be back.